Tonight on KQED Newsroom, we talked to Congressmember Eric Swalwell to get his thoughts on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. response so far, and his recent trip to the Ukrainian border, where he met with refugees. And as San Francisco voters decide who will fill a vacant assembly seat, we'll talk with the two candidates, David Campos and Matt Haney. Plus, did you know fortune cookies have California roots? The Golden Gate Fortune Cookie Factory is this week's edition of Something Beautiful. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco this Friday, April 1st, 2022. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer, in for Priya David Clemens. In just a few minutes, we'll be talking with the two candidates vying to fill a vacant assembly seat in San Francisco. But first, a group of lawmakers from the House Intelligence Committee recently traveled to the Ukrainian border for a first-hand look at the devastation. Among the bipartisan group, Bay Area Congressmember Eric Swalwell. He's calling on President Biden to do even more to help Ukraine and those fleeing the conflict. Congressman Swalwell joins us now from Washington, D.C. by Skype. Congressman, let's start with your recent visit to the Ukrainian border to meet with refugees. How did that affect your view of the conflict and what the U.S. should or should not be doing?
Heartbreaking, Scott. Just absolutely heartbreaking. You and I and your viewers have seen the images on TV, but nothing can describe seeing dozens of women getting off a train from their home country, landing in a new country with one large piece of luggage and a couple little kids tagging behind. And then that's who's coming. And it immediately strikes you that there's no men. The men are back fighting, and the women are anxious and scared, but they have to hold it together because their kids are depending on them. And so after spending a day with them and working at Chef Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen, I came back resolved to do everything I could in Congress to make sure Vladimir Putin fails in his effort and that those women and children can return to their country.
I'm wondering, what did they ask the U.S. to do that we aren't already doing?
Well, they're very grateful for the assistance we're providing. I was also struck by a young woman named Alice from San Francisco who had flown over there because she's a native Russian speaker and was working a shift at the Central Kitchen and helping refugees. So they see that Americans are stepping up, flying across the world to help out, but they're also asking, and I met with Ukrainian parliament members this week in Washington, to free their skies from Russia's missiles and bombs. And I support doing that by giving the Ukrainians a no-fly zone that they can enforce, by giving them Soviet-era MiGs and anti-aircraft systems so they have the ability to keep their skies free of Russia's bombs.
So you do not support what the president of Ukraine has been calling for, which is to have more active involvement with NATO planes to keep those skies free of Russian planes and missiles?
So I support giving them the NATO planes that they can fly, but at this point, for us not to enforce a no-fly zone of our own, I don't want to take that off the table because I think Putin goes up the ladder of atrocities. We should never take anything off the table as far as what we're willing to do. But right now, they have capable pilots. They just need more planes. And so I support getting them those planes and also moving in the anti-aircraft artillery so they can keep Russia's planes out of their airspace.
You've also asked President Biden to do more, including even tougher sanctions. What do you have in mind?
Well, first and foremost, I think we have to consider what we do about U.S. businesses that are still in Russia. And I hope that it's a public sentiment effort that pulls them out. But there are a number of U.S. businesses that are in Russia. Second, Scott, I think we have to consider closing Russia's missions across the world, their embassies. Again, disconnecting Russia from the table of nations, I think, is part of the plan to isolate them and show them that there's a price to pay. And then, of course, we don't take on any Russian oil anymore, but our European allies do. So working with them to make sure that they can have their own energy independence in case that's the next sanction that they have to take.
And then just quickly, a federal judge in Washington this week allowed your lawsuit against President Trump over January 6th, that attack on the Capitol, to go forward. This means you might have a chance to question him under oath. What do you want to ask him, especially given his record of lying? I mean, how do you know he'll even be telling the truth?
That's right. I would like to know everything he did and what he knew about the violence that was going to occur, whether it was conversations he had with the groups that were coming to Washington, D.C., because the president had tweeted out just weeks before that it was going to be wild. So he had some foreknowledge. Also, what did he know in intelligence reports about the violence that was coming to Washington, D.C.? I know what I was briefed on. And so after you learn what he knew, then you want to know what he did and what he didn't do, because he did incite and aim the violence at the Capitol. He also failed to stop the violence. And so there's a lot we can learn, and this was a big hurdle for us to clear.
All right, Congressmember Eric Swalwell, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe.
My pleasure.
In just over 2 weeks, San Francisco voters will decide who's going to replace David Chiu as the state assembly member representing the eastern half of the city. The choices are San Francisco Supervisor Matt Haney and former Supervisor David Campos, vice chair of the state Democratic Party. Both are Democrats, but only one will head to Sacramento to tackle issues like affordable housing, health care, homelessness, and a whole lot more. And they both join me now. Good to have you both here.
Thank you very much, Scott.
I want to begin by asking you the same question, and David Campos, you go first. Why you and not your opponent? Why are you the best person to fill this job?
This campaign is really not about me. It's about the fact that we have a government that is failing our residents, not just in San Francisco, but in the whole state of California. And I believe that the reason that failure is taking place is the way that we elect people. We have a supermajority of Democrats in the state legislature. They promised, when they got elected, before they got elected, that they would pass Medicare for all. And if you look at why that supermajority has not even voted on Medicare for all, I believe it's because of the way that they got elected. They got elected promising Medicare for all, but their campaigns were funded by people that actually oppose Medicare for all. And so we have a system that, as Elizabeth Warren said, is rigged. And we are running a campaign that is trying to change that system. And you see it here. Matt Haney is respectfully promising that he's going to pass Medicare for all, and yet his campaign is funded by the very people that oppose Medicare for all. And I think that the reason why the system has not addressed the issues facing the state is because the people funding the system are against that change.
Okay, we'll come back to a lot of those issues, but Matt will give you a chance to respond.
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you, Scott. We have huge challenges in our city and state. Housing is far too unaffordable. We're not building enough of it. There are thousands of people that live on our streets, and yet the state doesn't have a plan or accountability on homelessness. The state has been shutting down mental hospitals when we need to be opening them. And we are coming out of COVID at a time that our communities and neighborhoods and small businesses are struggling. It's in that context that we need leadership that is proven, that can deliver, and has been on the front lines of these issues and delivered results. That's been my career, 15 years in public service here, chaired our Budget and Finance Committee during COVID, took on these tough issues and delivered mental health SF, thousands of new units of housing, solutions on homelessness. But we need our state to lead. And we can't send someone up there who is really running on what they're against and platitudes and slogans. We need somebody who's about solutions and can bring people together to deliver. And that's why I'm running, and I think that's the difference in this campaign.
Well, and I think in many ways, on many issues, the two of you agree. There are different shades of where you land on single payer. I think you both support it. If not, correct me. But let's, since you mentioned that, David, let's talk about that. There was a bill, AB 1400 by Ash Kalra down in the South Bay to kind of move forward with single payer. Didn't even come up for a vote in the committee that it was in. Democrats run the table up in Sacramento. Would you, if you had been on that committee or if that had been your bill, would you have forced a vote? Would you have forced the members to vote even though you knew you didn't have the votes?
Let me say, I respect Ash Kalra. I think that he should be commended for the work that he has done. But I respectfully and strongly disagree with his decision to not have a vote. And I think that illustrates the problem, right? That in some respects, that decision was driven by the fact that maybe they didn't want to put their colleagues on the spot, the very colleagues that promised to their constituents that they would vote for Medicare for all. And that really, in a sense, captures what this campaign is about. It's about the fact that you have politicians running for office that say the right things, but they take money from the people that are against the very things they're promising. And when they get elected, you know what happens? They vote with their pockets, not for the people. That's the difference in this campaign. And I think that we are seeing that this is resonating with voters, that they want someone who actually is more concerned about them, not their fellow politicians.
So if you were to go up to Sacramento, Matt, are you saying, I'll get it done. I will get single payer done. And why you? How could you do what, Ash Kalra and many others? I mean, this has been voted on up in Sacramento for about 20 years.
Well, Ash Kalra is the author of the bill. He's been the biggest champion for Medicare for All, and he's given me his sole endorsement. He believes that I can go up and support him and make sure we get it done next time. Also have the support of the California Nurses Association, who sponsored the bill. And so the reality is that we need to build a broad-based movement all up and down our states and take on the big interest and get this done. We need single payer. The reality is we cannot rely on a healthcare system that is driven by profit. I've been very clear about that. I'm a longtime supporter of single payer. I've run outside organizations and worked in the building. I've seen how we can build power. I ran the UC Student Association. We can build the coalition that can actually move this, and that's why the author of the bill wants me up there as his partner to actually get this done next time.
So, you've been very clear, David, as you said, that this is sort of a corporate money problem, that people who are running, they're promising one thing. Gavin Newsom got a strong endorsement from the nurses when he ran for governor the first time because he promised to get it done. Seems to be backing away from it now. But it does raise a question, like when you go up to Sacramento, there are many different legislators from many parts of the state. It's a diverse place. Democrats in San Francisco, not the same as Democrats in Santa Barbara or San Diego or Fresno. And so I'm just wondering your approach to coalition building, because it sounds like you would go up there, and I don't want to say lecture them, but to say, you have to vote this way because it's best for the state, even though your backers want you to do another thing.
I think there's a way that you can be strong and still be collegial with your colleagues. I just got elected last year, the vice chair of the entire California Democratic Party, with support from people from all over the state. And they did that even though I have been very clear about my convictions. But the reason why the money is important here, Scott, is because time and time again, we've seen that case that the politician says, I'm for something, as they're getting money from the people that are against it. And in this case, respectfully, the supervisor has received $145,000 from the people that are against Medicare for All. $45,000 directly to his campaign, $95,000 to an independent expenditure. And when that has happened in Sacramento, what happens is the person gets there and they don't do what they promise. And that's why this campaign is so different. And if you want to know how I work with people, I have a majority of the Board of Supervisors, even though I'm not a supervisor, supporting me because they have seen what I've delivered. Yeah. Medicare for All, in some respects, San Francisco beat the state to the punch when we created the Healthcare Security Ordinance. And I made closing that gap so that it was real happen as a legislator.
What are your thoughts about that, Matt, in terms of single payer? I mean, I guess some would say, well, let's do what we can to fix the system we have. Yes, we can aspire to having single payer, but in the meantime, we don't have it. We may never have it, but we have Medicaid and Medi-Cal, all these other things. So what would your priority be on an issue like healthcare?
Well, we have to move forward single payer, and we have to bring it back and fight hard for it, and I will. At the same time, we have to expand coverage for folks right now. People are paying too much out of pocket for co-pays. They're paying too much when they need drugs, for their sickness. These are things that we can address right now, and we have to fight and deliver for. In my role as a supervisor, I've done the big things and the small things, and also taken on big corporations. We passed the first voter-approved CEO tax and took on the big corporations to do that here at the same time as I delivered things like 24-hour bathrooms. So you have to do both. And the reality is the doctors and dentists who are supporting me, who many of whom did heroic work during the pandemic, know that I disagree with them on this issue of single payer. He sought their endorsement, he just didn't get it, and that's why he's now singing a different tune.
I want to ask you both to address your critics, or what critics say about you, and we'll start with you. David, a lot of people say, smart guy, good guy, too ideological, not practical enough, alienates people by not compromising enough. They mentioned single payer, blaming Sacramento politicians, for not getting it passed. Those are the people you're going to have to work with if you go up there. So how do you address that criticism that you're more interested in sort of the ideology of things than the practical side of how things work?
Well, I address it by pointing to the things that I accomplished in San Francisco. Not only closing the loophole to make healthcare universal in San Francisco, but passing Clean Power SF, 100% renewable energy, passing the legacy business program, protecting our sanctuary policy, things that required super majorities of the legislature here in the city that passed because of me. I think the reason why someone like Toni Atkins, who is the president pro tem of the state Senate, is supporting me is because she has seen my ability to bring people together and, you know, the work of the Democratic Party. But the fact that you try to be collegial and work with people doesn't mean that you don't stand on principle. And I think that's the difference. And that's why I think that how you run your campaign illustrates what you're going to do when you're elected.
Matt Haney, critics of you might say that you're more of a show horse, not so much of a workhorse. As David Campos points out, I don't know if any of your colleagues on the Board of Supes are endorsing you. 6 are endorsing him. You're quick to put out a press release, quick to go to a press conference, maybe not so quick to roll up your sleeves and get hard work done. What's your response to that?
Well, you know, there's been analyses of this, even done by KQED, that show that I authored and passed more legislation than all but one of my colleagues. I've been very effective on the Board of Supervisors in delivering past some of the biggest, most landmark policies over the last number of years, including co-authoring Mental Health SF, guaranteeing a right to mental health care in our city, building more housing in my district by far than any other, delivering the big and the small things, creating a new Department of Sanitation, bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars in new funding for affordable housing. These are results. I represent a very tough district, and I have delivered on these big issues. And the reality is, you know, I have the support of 3 of my colleagues plus me, so I have 4 and he has 6. So it's not that big of a difference. I also have the president of the Board of Supervisors and tremendous support from working people, from labor, and have built a huge coalition of people in this race, including Bilal Mahmoud, who came in 3rd and had a great showing in this race and immediately came out and endorsed me, as well as all of the folks who've been behind him.
Let's move to another issue, big one for this district, is rent control, renters' rights. Just yesterday, the legislature passed a bill that would extend renter protections through June 30. It was going to expire today for those who had already applied for rent help, but it also undermined local moratoriums on evictions in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. Scott Wiener and Phil Ting, 2 of the representatives from San Francisco, both voted against it. They were two of the very few. How would you have voted on that bill?
I would have followed the lead of these 2 representatives. I think Scott Wiener and Phil Ting are right. I think that we need to protect renters. And I think the reason why Phil Ting is endorsing me in this campaign is because he knows my commitment. And to renters in this race, there is a very clear choice. They just got in the mail a piece of mail that says the choice is clear, funded, by the way, by the realtors who have put in hundreds of thousands of dollars to support Supervisor Haney in this race. So if you're a renter, just know that the people that are trying to go after tenants in this city are behind the other candidate. You as a tenant have a very clear choice. Do you want someone who's going to be beholden to all these moneyed interests that are essentially trying to fight rent control, or are you going to be with the person who's supported by the tenants union and all of the pro-housing, pro-tenant organizations in the city?
Matt, I know you're backed by the YIMBYs. You're backed by, I think, builders as well, some of those unions. But how would you have voted on that bill? Would you have done what David just said and just not voted no? I mean, because the other argument, of course, is like half a loaf, or it's better to do something than to do nothing.
No, I also think that we need to extend the eviction moratorium, and we also need to protect San Francisco's stronger laws that allow for support for renters.
How would you have voted on that?
So I would not have supported that. I would have voted no. I'm the only renter in this race. If you look at Sacramento and you look at representation, about half of households in California, more than half in San Francisco, are renters, yet less than 2%. There are only 2 out of 120 of our legislators are renters. I would be the 3rd. And so I live in rent-controlled housing. I've defended people in court who are facing evictions. I've been a strong champion for and passed just cause eviction protections for renters here. So I'm going to Sacramento to be a champion for renters, and I have that track record. That means protecting tenants here. It also means aggressively building more housing and affordable housing.
Well, the reality is that if you look at Supervisor Haney's record, it has changed. You know, the Matt Haney of a year ago had that record, had all these pro-tenant organizations supporting him. You know, we supported him for supervisor. And what happened is that the moment he decided to run for assembly, those positions changed. He became the person who ran against the YIMBY candidate to now become the YIMBY candidate. And what changed, quite frankly, and the voters can decide for themselves, a lot of money has been going to his campaign. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from realtors, from developers. And that position has changed. So I don't know where he will be in a year from now, but I can tell you that that change is clear.
Matt.
I've been a tenant champion my entire career, defended people in court. I've done that repeatedly. I've fought for tenants' rights and delivered. We extended eviction protections. I authored the law to every tenant in San Francisco. And my position on tenants' rights has not changed. I've been consistent. I've also been consistently pro-housing, building more housing in my district than any other, including a lot more affordable and supportive housing. And that's a big reason why I'm running. He's been against housing. So yes, his position has been consistent. It's been consistent against housing.
Let me just ask a specific question about that, because when you were on the Board of Supervisors, you promoted a moratorium on building in the Mission District, one of the neighborhoods you represented. And that was a time we needed more housing. So I'm looking back on that. Was that the right thing to do?
Well, as I've indicated, I supported that in response to community concerns for the same reason, by the way, that Supervisor London Breed at the time supported it. And it's interesting because—
Would you do it again?
I've said no, that I've learned from that. But what's interesting here, right, is that Supervisor Haney is attacking me for that very position, even though he himself took that position. But I want to be very clear about housing. The fact that I have said that I am for affordable housing does not make me anti-housing. What the YIMBYs want is to simply give a blank check to developers and to let them build whatever they want. And those of us who want to keep working people and middle-income people in San Francisco are simply saying, yes, we should build all kinds of housing, but we must build housing that is actually affordable for the teachers, for the people who clean our houses, who work at our coffee shops. That's what I believe. And being for affordable housing, being against simply giving developers a blank check is not anti-housing, it's pro-affordable housing. There's a difference.
Quick response, then I want to move on to something else.
I'll put my track record in building affordable housing up against his any day. We are building thousands and thousands of units of affordable housing in my district, many more than he did during his time. And reality is we need housing of all types. Projects like the 469 Stevenson project, 24% affordable, 1,000+ union jobs, 500 units of housing near transit. We need projects like that. I was for it. He was against it.
There are a lot of issues around homelessness, as we know, in this city, in your district, in your old district as well. I live in the Mission. There's a proposal, you've made a proposal to have these safe injection sites in every county, all 58 counties. How are you going to convince somebody in, Trinity County or any other like Red County, Shasta County, to put an injection site?
Well, I think that's the point. It's being able to work with people, and some of the measures that I passed successfully, whether it's, protecting universal health care, the sanctuary policy, we worked with communities in the different districts to convince those representatives that doing that was in their interest of their constituents. What I'm saying is that San Francisco, in many respects, has carried too much of the burden when it comes to homelessness, and that other jurisdictions need to step in. And that's why I think that it is fair for us to ask other jurisdictions to do the same.
Matt.
Every city and county across the state has to do their share, and they're not right now. They need to have a plan of how many shelter beds they're going to have, supportive housing they're going to build, and there has to be an actual plan for accountability and consequences if they don't do their part. We can't solve homelessness just in San Francisco or just in one neighborhood of San Francisco. It's going to take shared responsibility. That's true on things like safe injection sites, which I authored the legislation to actually create a process to open those. And we finally have a site in my district. But it can't just be in the Tenderloin. It has to be throughout our city, and it has to be around the state if people are going to take responsibility and actually address
What would accountability look like if a county isn't building enough housing?
Well, I think there has to be funding connected to doing the right thing, and I think I have the record. I'm the one who created the first navigation.
Are you saying that you would cut off funding if they don't meet certain
Absolutely.
criteria?
I think that should be on the table. I think that it's not just the stick. You should also provide incentives, financial incentives. And I have the record showing how to get it done. I opened the first navigation center of anyone in the city. I proposed the first injection site. And in Santa Clara County, I helped to build thousands of units of supportive housing to deal with homelessness in that county.
We are really short on time. We have so much more to talk about, but I want to give each of you, just real quick, final pitch to voters. Matt Haney, you first.
Sure. Well, we have really serious challenges here. We need to send someone to Sacramento, who's been on the front lines of those issues, who's going to build more housing, who's going to make sure we get people off the streets into supportive housing and shelter, open more mental hospitals, get more aggressive about renewable energy and climate change. I have that track record. I'll be effective and bold and deliver for San Francisco.
This system needs to change, and my campaign is about changing the system so that it's finally responding to your interests, not the interests of the corporations and the big moneyed interests in Sacramento. That's why we're running a corporate-free campaign.
All right.
Join us.
Very good. San Francisco Supervisor Matt Haney, David Campos, Vice Chair of the State Democratic Party. Thank you both so
Thank
much.
you.
And don't forget to vote. For more information about the April 19th special election, go to kqed.org. And to find out how and where to vote in this assembly race, go to sfelections.sfgov.org. Tonight's look at something beautiful takes us to San Francisco's Chinatown for a delicious tour of the Golden Gate Fortune Cookie Factory. And that's our show for tonight. I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find KQED Newsroom online or on Twitter, or email us at knr@kqed.org. Tune in next week for a special edition of KQED Newsroom and a look at California's plastic problem. Have a great weekend.